If you're looking for ways to make your plastic toys and other objects look more like worn out, weathered, hammered metal equipment, then this episode is for you. Because this is your Geek Face. On our last episode, we tried to show you how we made this Pip-Boy here look all sparkly and new. But most people try to make theirs look worn and battered. But the weathering process that most people use, I don't like. Because the most common process is to paint the item, then paint on top of that the silver to make it look as if there's scratches or there's metal showing through. And it's okay from a distance, but up close you can see that that paint was painted on top. And the problem with that is that it's not three-dimensional. It's not correct. Real scratches are under the other paint. If you visited antique shops and seen old metal toys and equipment, you'll see that the metal underneath is bumpy and the paint colors are uneven. Most importantly, the paint is actually pilled or chipped, and you can see the paint is on top of the metal, not the other way around. In the 1950s, it was common to have heavy metal toys. And typically they look like this, and most commonly were red. So around Halloween I got this Nuka Cola gun for approximately $20. It's a retro punk looking toy, and I wanted to make it look like a classic 1950s collectible. Now typically there are rules to making something look nice, and typically I'd be sticking with those rules. But on this occasion I'm wanting this to look like something I'd find in an antique store. Typically when you put on a paint application, you want it to be smooth and clean looking. But in this case, what we're looking for is the opposite. We want something that looks old and worn. And so for that reason, a lot of the rules that we typically use are the same ones that we're going to have to break. So the first thing we do want to do is take this apart so we can sand and paint it. And the benefit of doing this is that it's a lot better to take things apart into their smallest parts, as small as you can, and not have to mask them off. Because once when you mask something off, you always run the risk that something's going to bleed or that it won't work out quite the way you want it to. So you do need to be careful when taking apart these back pieces. There are wires that run throughout this, and they are very, very flimsy, and so you run the risk of disabling the whole thing. Just want to keep track of all my screws as much as possible. Taking out our batteries. Okay, and with that, there it goes. Put these over here, and I know this part's a little bit tricky to get apart right here, which means you have to go up all the way and slide those out. There we go. 3. Oops. There we go. Okay. Now, the wings that are in here, I'm going to have to unscrew those too. And pull that off. Put that over there. That one off already. These pull off right here as well. Okay. They just pop off like that. Put that right there. I think that that's gonna work out pretty good. So everything is taken apart. It's all ready to be painted. I don't want to spray actually over this area right here. I think I want to maintain the Nuka Cola writing in the original silver, and I think I'm going to also not worry so much about this whole oval area. So let's go ahead and mask that area off. You can do corners with tape pretty well when you're pushing down with one finger and curving it with the other, but at the same time, for this project, we don't have to be perfect on these things because it's not meant to look perfect. So just remember that this whole process, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter how perfect this looks. I am going to try and make it look the same though on both sides. So, all right. So that's how it looks. Now that our gun is taped off, I could even put it together, which is my plan. The reason being that I want the paint to look like it is consistent, and that it actually it's all one metal, that this was originally at one point in time one, and that way it doesn't look like it decayed unevenly and then was put together. So everything is taken apart, it's all ready to be painted. Now the question is, how do we paint it? How do we paint it in such a way that will look like some old farm equipment or something you'd find in an antique shop? Well, the first thing we got to look at is what we would typically do. What we would typically do is sand these really well and then spray them with a good primer so that the paint will stick and keep it really thin and smooth. Those are the first good steps to do. What we're going to do instead is we're going to just jump in and we're going to spray it with a metallic paint. In this case, we're going to be using this Rust-Oleum Hammered Paint Primer in 1 right here. And the great thing about this is that it does stick to anything, and it will go on really well, and it sticks pretty well. So I'm not going to worry too much about sanding it. The downside is typically you wouldn't want to paint on top of this. The reason being that paint on top of certain metals doesn't stick very well. It just doesn't. It's more likely to bubble, it's more likely to scrape off. So this is normally not a good primer. But we're going to use it in this case because it does two things for me. One is I also want to get this texture that it has, and it looked great. It looks like old metal, bumpy metal. There's great texture to it. So basically we painted everything with the exception of these two caps. I wanted to keep those pretty clean looking because I wanted them to have kind of an aluminum look like a bottle cap. And I'm going to do a little extra something later on with that. But for right now, all my parts are now officially painted the same color. Now the next important step to this process is that typically you'd want to spray on your next level very evenly. You want it to be nice and even. You want it to look pretty smooth, pretty nice. In this case, we want it to be thick, we want it to be uneven, and we want to create as much randomization of that color as we can. So for that reason, I've got about 5 different colors that are in the spectrum of red, from the red that I'm wanting in the middle to some orangish reds on the side, and then some brownish reds on this side. And so I'm going to be trying to make some random colors that are thick and that are quickly put on, because we do want to get this on there as quickly as we can because we're going to have to do some things while they're still tacky. So that's what we did. We sprayed the gun, and as we're going back and forth, I'm trying to get some areas darker reds, some areas that are lighter reds. I'm just globbing it on, and I've got 2 or 3 colors that I'm spraying around the same time, wanting to get them on somewhat unevenly, wanting to get some darker colors around some of the corners, and then get some light colors in other corners. And basically, I did a really cruddy job. So the next major step that you should never do at this point in time is you should leave it alone. Don't touch it. Watch your fingers. Don't pick it up. Don't scrape it, because the paint will come off. You don't want that. And that's actually exactly what we want in this case. We want to touch it, and we want to scrape it, and we want to do everything else we can with it while it's still kind of tacky. And so I'm going along with my fingernail, for example, and scratching off. You can see where the Nuka-Cola symbol used to be, and so we're just scratching where that symbol was and scratching off the paint to expose those letters. And it looks pretty good. It looks really smooth. It looks great. You can take as much as you want, and you'll notice that paint is coming right off. It's exposing it perfectly underneath. Then next we're going to go around that oval, and we're going to scrape off little bits and pieces around that oval. Make some chips as much as we can, and then I'm going to also use things like this. This is tape that was left over from what we masked off. We could use some of this. We could touch it against portions of the gun, and that will also pull off bits of this paint and raises the edges too. That's the other piece to making it look three-dimensional, is that we want those edges to be above the paint very descriptively. Anywhere that we can see a line or a corner, I want to try and expose some of the metal. I love this little area in the back, this round area, wanting to go around that and really scratch off around that area and making it where you can see those silvery lines that are underneath. Also, I'm thinking about the ways that would be played with. So we know that when kids play with this kind of toy, the most exposed or vulnerable areas are going to be these wings, for example. So I know some kid's going to hit this wing against something, so I'm going to remove as much of that as I can, which I can scratch that. Or, again, I could use some of this tape. Or I could, because it's still tacky, I could even take a brush and as the brush touches it, pull it away and it'll rip off pieces of paint. I'll also notice that my fingerprints are also showing up in some areas of it. That's okay too. It looks like it's all pushed together. It's just looking like there's all these textures that are now there, and all these colors, and it's looking more and more like it's really metal, which is great. That is exactly what I was trying to seek. Now, I also had turned some of these pieces a silverish color too, using this paint, and so it contrast wise looks really good in between this handle, which is great. It looks really nice. The other thing that I did is that I took this piece right here and decided that I wanted to make it look more like a real bottle cap. So that meant that the edges should be a little bit pried up and not so consistent. It looks a little too consistent for me. So what I did is I took a heat gun and I hit the edges of these ridges here, and then kind of pushed them in and pushed them around a little bit so they weren't quite as even, and gave it more this look like a real metal cap. It really looks like an aluminum cap. And then I painted underneath that cap and made sure there was more details so that it truly looked like it was painted metal. I also want to make sure that it looked like the real one in the game, and I drilled a hole right here in the end of that cap, which is not a problem for display. But let's say that I want to make this for cosplay. I wouldn't be able to do that because this is not capped off anymore. Often you'll see that these guns will be fully capped off, or they'll have an orange cap on them because it makes it easier to see that they can't fire, that they are disabled, or that they have no ability for firing. This one's made to look like it could, so I probably couldn't use this in any type of cosplay. The other thing I did had to do with this cap right here. It was just red on both sides. I wanted to make it look different than that, and so I ended out making it so that one side was completely silver and shiny on the inside, and also right here I wanted to make sure that it looked like there was a hole. Before there was nothing, so now it looks like at least it's dark. And so when I close it or open it, it just looks a little bit better. I did go back and do some paint detailing around some of these screws, but nothing too dramatic. For the most part, this was all just from the process that we did. Now this is right where I want it. It looks perfect to me. I like it a lot. And so at this point, I don't want it to continue to scratch. I don't want the paint to continue to be scratched off, or for it to get ruined from what it looks like right now. I really like where it is right now exactly, and so I want to freeze that in time. And the way I'm going to do that is with this matte finish right here. I'm going to go ahead and spray it with this. Which I will say does give it a texture afterwards. It makes it look the way it does right here, right now. I do like how it makes it look a little bit flatter, but it feels bizarre. You remember with my Pip-Boy, it was literally the weight that you would expect it to be. It was exactly how much I would expect the Pip-Boy to be by the time we were done with it. Whereas this gun we've made it look like something. As I look at it and I feel it, it looks like it should be very heavy, like something out of the 1950s. But instead, this is as light as paper. I mean, it is bizarre to look at. Your brain just expects for it to be very heavy, and instead it feels like nothing. It's just so light. So, at any rate, that's one thing that's different than some of the other projects we've done. We've actually made something lighter looking than it actually is. So if you make something using this process, we'd love to see it. Stay tuned for next time when we show you how to apply rust effects in washes. Also be sure to check out this fully functioning Pip-Boy we made. Like, subscribe, comment below. This was your Geek Fix.